Thailand World Cup prep, Ireland Wolves and Namibia in South Africa, plus news from Nepal, the USA and all over the world. That's coming up on the Emerging Cricket Podcast. Thank you for joining us again for the Emerging Cricket Podcast online and on Sport FM in Perth. I'm Daniel Beswick, and tonight we are Cutler-less, or Cutless, as it probably should be said. But I do have Nick Skinner with me, better known on Twitter as Copernicus Cricket. How's things?
Things are all right. Just got it's lukewarm cup of tea. We've been faffing around, but keen to get going. Had a lovely sunset this afternoon. What have you been up to, Bez?
It was nice, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually in your neck of the woods, Nicholas, visiting my parents and then going to cricket training on that finals push. We're comfortably in the top four, so barring a miracle in this last round game, we're in the finals of Central Coast First Grade, which is good. Yeah, as I said before, we've given Cutler the night off. He has some family visiting him up in Brisbane, and our schedules didn't quite match up this week, but it's probably a well-earned rest for Tim. He does the lion's share of the work here at EC overall, so he's preparing for Thailand's World Cup campaign, and that's where we'll start tonight, discussing Thailand's World Cup preparation, and they are in Adelaide at the moment. They took on New Zealand in a warm-up game. They lost by 81 runs, but some positive signs throughout the match and throughout their campaign thus far. The energy's been very good, and we've had Nishad Rego on the scene there. He's working as their media manager for the tournament, which is great to see. He's been providing diary entries over every day of their campaign, which have been some fascinating reading, actually. I've really enjoyed them personally. But for Thailand, they're on the precipice of something amazing here, competing at a World Cup for the first time. And if you look at the scorecard, Nick, in that game, there were a few positive performances around from the Thais, and I don't think they'll be completely blown away in this tournament. I think that they will have quite a lot of spirit, quite a lot of energy, and then ultimately, I think when it does come to the scorecards, they will look a little bit closer than I think a lot of people may think they might get.
Yeah, well, according to Nish, a big part of the problem for them, they were just nerves, and, you know, obviously facing New Zealand for the first time and just getting into the swing of a World Cup preparation. It's a big deal for a bunch of players who've come a long way in a very short period of time. My absolute favourite thing about this Thailand team is just the way they play and the team spirit that they have, and they really embody the spirit of cricket, don't they? And the ICC Twitter account was doing little profiles of each of the captains and the teams, and yeah, Soren Tipoch, the Thai captain, when she was asked, you know, who's one of your players to look out for, or, you know, who's going to be an exciting player to watch, she replied, well, I can't really single out one of them because we play as a team, and the team is one unit. And I just think that's just perfectly sums up the way they approach the game, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I was reading some of the updates that I'm guessing Nishad was providing. Here we go. 50 up in the 10th over as Shanita ramps Tahuhu for a boundary to third man. That, just to have the guts to go with a shot like that when you're on an international scene like this, I know it's a warm-up game, but I think that's irrelevant here. You've got to say that, yeah, they're going to bring a great spirit of cricket and the energy, and their bowling is going to be what potentially saves them. But what we did see when they had that brief tour in India before this tournament was that they were able to win games off their bat as well. So they become quite a versatile team. And the thing about the Thais, which probably sets them apart from not only associate women's teams, but also a couple of the lower full member women's teams, is that they actually have 11 players in their team who can all contribute rather well. You know, you do see from time to time a lot of these teams tend to have maybe 3 or 4 really good players, and the rest, the quality might slide a little bit. But for Thailand, it does look as if, you know, if someone gets called upon to bowl 4 tied overs, it seems that they're capable of doing that. So looking forward to that. We're going to be at various parts of the country. Nishad, of course, is following them around as a member of their staff for this tournament, but Tim will be in Perth for their match over there. We're travelling to Canberra on a bit of a road trip, Nick and I. Reminds me, Nick, I've got to get you that Emerging Cricket shirt out to you as well. But that'll be quite fun. The Wednesday and the Friday next week, they're taking on, I believe it's South Africa and the English, I think, in those two games. So, well, it's going to be exciting. And I think they're targeting the Pakistan game as the game that they could potentially win in their group, because they have been thrown a very difficult group. But I think they'll put in a few good performances over the course of the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as you were saying, the fact that they have players that can contribute all the way down, Nishad was saying interesting seeing Onitsha Kamchompu smashing Tahuhu with a hook shot for 6. That's the sort of shots that they can play. And so I guess it's a case of needing to execute their skills consistently, and that's the big step up. And this goes for all, associate cricket, and the gap in quality, as we've seen, is reducing. It's not usually the skills that are lacking, it's the application and the discipline, and they're capable of pulling off these shots, but they just don't quite have the concentration to last for a longer innings. So Thailand's approach of playing as a team and of being very disciplined in the way they play is, I think, going to put them in good stead in terms of bridging that gap. And if they can actually put it together, I think they will be very competitive. There's a reason they won 17 games in a row last year, and it's not because they're a bad team.
Yeah, that's no fluke. I don't care what level you play at. If you can win 17 matches in a row and break a world record, just as the icing on the cake, you've got to be doing something right. And the discipline and the coaching and just the drilling into the team has to be good for consistency like that. And just to move on from this, after the World Cup, they're hosting a quad series in April, hosting Ireland, Scotland and Zimbabwe. To say 10 years ago that Thailand would be hosting a women's 4-team tournament, 2 full members plus Scotland, people would have called you crazy. But it just goes to show, when there is potential for growth, the growth can materialise. And I hope as well, and we might touch on the ICC plans in scheduling from 2023 onwards at the end of the show. I know we made a bit of a pact that we'll only get there if time permits, because we're both really angry about that. But if we do see Thailand perform admirably at this tournament, it is proof once again that if you do give opportunities for associate members, they do play up a lot of the time. We can think of several instances of associate members and lower full members in giant killings in World Cups, and Thailand has the potential to do that right now in front of an Australian audience. But to move on again to this tour that they are hosting, Nick, it's a great sign of where cricket's going, and for Ireland, Scotland and Zimbabwe to all acknowledge that Thailand is a place of immense cricketing growth, and to have that series there, it can only bode well for Thailand in the future, even after participating in a World Cup.
Well, the interesting thing is, 10 years ago, you're right, you probably wouldn't have expected to see this sort of series happening, but they're just about would-be favourites, I would say, their women's team. The only question, Zimbabwe hasn't been playing much recently due to their administrative problems, but the only question I would say would be whether they can translate their 2020 form into the 50-over format, which has been a stumbling block for associates in the past. But yeah, they went past Ireland in that qualifier to get here, to get to the World Cup, and that was an exciting game. So I'm looking forward to this series, and as you say, it's 50 overs. It's going into the upcoming global qualifier for the Women's 50-over World Cup, which is of course occurring next year.
Yeah, as you said, Nick, it's been a long time since Zimbabwe have played competitive cricket. It was actually all the way back in June last year, and we know about all the troubles that occurred in Zimbabwe cricket, and hopefully some brighter days in Zimbabwean cricket. And yeah, for Ireland and Scotland, who didn't qualify for this T20 World Cup, Ireland qualified for the T20 World Cup before in the West Indies. And I think that just highlights just how good this Thai team had to be to even qualify for this tournament. To move on now, and from Zimbabwe, we can go to Uganda and the Uganda men's team. They've just finished a bilateral tour of Qatar, in which they played the Qatar national team in 3 T20 internationals. They also played 2 50-over matches against the Qatar Presidents 11. Quite a successful tour in a way. They did manage to win 1 of the T20 internationals and 1 of the 50-over matches. Away from home, several teams can't boast that same record. Looking at some of their performers, guys like Kenneth Wisewar contributed with both bat and ball. For the Qataris, it's great just to host cricket at the West End Park International Cricket Stadium as well. Just shows that the golf and cricket are growing quite well across all the national teams. We have seen Oman perform admirably in Cricket World Cup League 2 as well. But you alerted me to a record here involving Frank Unsabuga. Nicholas, do you want to elaborate on that? Because I don't really want to steal the scoop off you.
I think I'm just repeating something Andrew Nixon mentioned earlier, so, full credit to him. But yeah, Frank Nusbuga has played a match in 4 decades now. He started way back in the 90s, playing for the Eastern Central Africa 11, actually, before Uganda had a national team. So that he's been playing cricket longer than Uganda has. But yes, so he's gone from the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and now he's into the 2020s. He's not even 40 yet, so he'll be pushing well into the 2020s, I reckon. And looking at this series, he's still was bowling really well, keeping it really tight. He went at a fraction over 6 in a really high-scoring series where most of the other bowlers, I think, were going at 7s or 9s even. So that was really impressive for him, and he's just one of those bowlers that's very hard to get away. And I remember talking a couple of weeks ago about, potential associate picks in T20 leagues, and I think Frank Nusabuga is the kind of guy that would be very valuable to a T20 franchise because he just keeps it so tight and he rushes through overs that the batsmen sort of don't know what to do. So I'm a big fan of his. Looking at the Ugandans overall, though, they just struggled a little bit with the bat. No one went past 100 in terms of runs for the series in the T20s, whereas 3 of the Qatari batsmen did. So that sort of shows you the difference. Young Frank Akinkwasa was an exciting find for them. He smashed 66 in the first match that they lost that game, but he put up a valiant resistance. And my tip for Zephaniah Aranitwe is one to watch out for, has so far been a bit of a bust as he's really struggled for form. He's a big hitting opening batsman, but he just hasn't got going. And that basically has sunk them, the fact that they just couldn't get the runs on the board. Looking at the stream, I watched most of the second game where Kamran Khan smashed 68, and the pitch, it was a bit sluggish, and I think that's probably what did the Ugandans. And so it's good that they're getting some more practice in here, getting used to the more kind of spinning, slow, sluggish conditions. I was interested to see Taimur Sajjad was missing, and he was skipper for Qatar in their Asia T20 regional finals, where they famously beat Nepal and contributed to Nepal missing out on the global qualifiers. And so it was interesting that they didn't pick him. Potentially it was just a work thing. I don't know. There's not a lot of information coming out of Qatar. They're sort of a bit like Oman were a couple of years ago, just going about their business, not really publicising much, which is a bit disappointing. But yes, their top order really was the difference between them and the Ugandans ultimately.
Yeah, well, you talk about Oman, and I think even still today, they don't really leak a lot of information out. They do like to keep their cards close to their chest. Going back to Uganda, I'm hoping to hear Frank Akinkwasa's name a bit more, given his age and given the ability so young. It's quite rare in associate cricket to be able to showcase that skill and to provide, your team such a valuable contribution, making 66 off 32 balls in that first T20 International. I've just noticed that it doesn't have a Wikipedia page, so Lugnuts, we know you're listening. If you can get onto that would be ideal. But yeah, again, full credit to the Qataris for getting a stream up. We know, again, going back to Oman, they failed to have a stream up for their Challenge League leg, and we are hearing from Andrew Leonard actually that some future Omani stuff will be streamable, which is a positive sign moving forward. People do want to watch this Oman, and we know that you aren't exactly strapped for cash at this point, so hopefully things will get there eventually. But to go back to Qatar once more and reminiscing about that win over Nepal in the T20 Asian qualifier, the scoreboard actually, if anything, flattered Nepal. They were well beaten by Qatar that day, so you would think that, given Qatar's full availability of players, and we know that availability is a different kettle of fish in associate cricket, if they do put it together, they could have quite a good squad on their hands. And yeah, looking forward to potentially another power from the Middle East. We've seen Oman develop into such a brilliant side at associate level, and I think they're only going to improve with some more competition from their neighbours around them, and Qatar might just be the team that provides that.
Yeah, and the thing with all these teams in the Gulf is, we've talked about it before, but just the fact that they're airline hubs, very easily accessible, means that they're a good stopover for teams on the way somewhere else. As we've seen, Uganda's going to India to do some more prep games against some club sides. So obviously stopping off in Qatar was just a logical thing to do. I was a bit disappointed with the crowds. I mean, obviously Qatar's not a big draw card, but looking at these teams in the Middle East where there is a large subcontinent migrant worker population, and yeah, you would hope that they might get a bit more support for their adopted country. The crowds do turn out in the Middle East for full member cricket, so yeah, it's just a little bit disappointing that they can't seem to quite find the same enthusiasm for their own players.
Well, I would just quickly add that it's probably the exposure that would be the biggest part of bringing people or full member fans into associate cricket. We can sit here as a podcast and say that there isn't much coverage and we're providing some sort of coverage, but ultimately it comes down to the work that a lot of these associate boards, are able to do, because we know that, in some places the resources are scarce and it can be very difficult to put these things out there for people because there's just such little money going around. But yeah, if you can manage to get that exposure, is to harness it, because you look at the way that Oman and UAE and Qatar, their population and how where that population actually comes from, whether it's, native people or workers coming into the country, you would think that there'd be enough interest in developing the game, no matter, what people's background. And then it ties back in, and we have this discussion all the time, and I'm trying to piece together an article about this, but the idea of so-called expat players in some of these countries, well, you need to actually look back and see how a lot of these populations are put together, and what the split is between people who have come as immigrants to certain countries and how many natives are there. And then to look at it from a cricketing perspective, it's very, very difficult for some of these countries to be completely, for a lack of a better term, indigenous. All knowledge comes from somewhere, right? We get this with someone like Pavel Florin at Romania. He didn't pick up a cricket bat because he saw a cricket bat and he wanted to play. He came about it through being inspired by something else, by someone else, by a team, by a group of players, or something like that. It's the same as, we've actually seen Pavel Florin represent his country in American football as well. He's not an American living in Romania. He's a Romanian native who has been exposed to this sport. So the only way you can develop this growth in people of a native background is to expose them to a new sport. And it sometimes has to just start from an expat community. And we hear about guys who are living and working in far-flung places around the world. We talked to Chris Pearce from the Czech Republic, who's teaching people as an Englishman in the Czech Republic about cricket. We hear from Craig White in Mexico, who's English, teaching Mexicans about cricket. All knowledge comes from somewhere. So there's plenty of facets to it. And we'll be talking about this in articles by several people because it is a hot topic at the moment. But yeah, it all ties in together. When we do talk about associate cricket, every single factor all comes from all these intertwining factors of how things are played out and the way that people view these as well.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. It's a really big topic.
Yeah, I apologise to you and I apologise to the audience.
Oh, no. I love it. I mean, this is the sort of stuff, I could do a whole series of podcasts on this, but the thing that I would point out, in a lot of these Gulf countries, it's a unique political situation where the so-called indigenous population, which, people complain about, they're all expats, there's no Arabs, whatever. But a lot of the time, the Arabs are actually the minority in that country. So in a lot of ways, the team is actually an accurate reflection of the cricket scene in these Gulf countries at least, which again is why I would sort of hope that they would get a bit more enthusiasm for the team. In terms of, growing the game, and you bring up the example of Pavel Florin and how, he must have been inspired by someone, and, you look at his Cluj cricket club, the cult heroes of last year's ECL, and most of them are not Romanian, and Pavel is a bit of an exception in that case. It's getting a bit better with the next generation. His son's actually playing cricket as well, so potentially there's another generation of Florins coming through. But how did cricket spread originally? It was the British Empire. How did cricket get to India, which is now the world's dominant force in cricket? And well, it got to India through the British, through expats playing the game and the locals deciding to pick it up. So at some point, you've got to have someone from another country bringing cricket in, because as you say, it's very uncommon for someone to just sort of randomly decide to start liking a sport without actually seeing it around them, and for it to start developing some mind space. So yeah, as you say, it has to come from somewhere, and in a lot of countries, we're at the stage where it's being spread by people coming from somewhere else, and that's fine. The only thing is, we need to, as cricket, we in the sense of cricket as a whole,
the global we, yeah.
Yeah, need to capitalize on that and make sure that, in addition to just having games in the park and people noticing that these immigrants are playing this strange game, converting that into an actual cricket scene that is self-sustaining, and that's the big challenge for the ICC and local boards as well.
Yeah, just to finish up on this, and this is something we'll talk about in more depth, but, with an Olympic Games this year and all the sports that come from that, I always remember, watching a lot of these Olympic sports and being kind of inspired and, watching handball in the Olympics and being like, I wonder if I can join an Australian handball setup, or, just join and play in a league, because this is really cool. I'm sure that other people, if cricket was to be an Olympic sport, and that's something that has come up again in the cricketing discourse, and it's for another podcast on another day, and bringing in countries like China who will be able to see that and look to build their cricket to perform at the Olympic Games, because ultimately that's China's sporting barometer is Olympic gold medals. It's only another way for the sport to improve. But yeah, again, just to kind of finish up, cricket has to come from somewhere, and knowledge being imparted. For many of us, we were lucky we had junior coaches already in well-established clubs around Australia and around the cricketing world where we're taught these things, for other people who aren't as lucky but are really interested in cricket. It takes the Chris Pearces and the Craig Whites to, help them out and to introduce them to the sport. And that's why we try and check in with them as much as we can, because that's ultimately where the next dimension of cricket growth is going to come from countries like that. But anyway, Nick, I'm going to use this gavel I have in my hand and end this conversation for another podcast. I'm sure Tim is cringing listening to us talk about this for the upteenth time. Some more cricket coming out of Africa, or at least an African team. And Namibia, well, I would say hosted the Island Wolves, but the matches have been held in South Africa, so both countries moving to a neutral venue. As we record tonight, there has been 2 T20 matches between the Island Wolves and Namibia A, so the Island Wolves essentially an Island A team. Namibia won the first match by 3 wickets in the last over, chasing down a total, while Island Wolves managed to win the second T20 by 24 runs. As we see, encouraging performances by both sides, but something that we saw, and this is well established from his amazing 2019, Gerard Erasmus is one of the best players in the associate game. To come out and play the way he has, providing pretty much a match-winning knock in the first game, a contribution in the second. He's the captain of Namibia. They're a one-day international team. He's got to be a rock star in Namibia now, surely. The guy is just going from strength to strength. But if you do come back to it, it's a great hit out for both these countries. We do know that it's quite difficult for a lot of these members to put together tours like this, and the financial strain that probably puts on these countries. But to get what they need to get out of this, both countries with huge 2020s coming up, and these guys, some of them on the periphery, or at least, on the fringe of being selected for their international teams, get a good chance to audition in front of coaches and selectors for future international cricket.
Yeah, I like the way that Namibia have gone about this, and they've picked Erasmus and a couple of other senior guys, like Holtz and Williams, so that, the young guys coming through can get a bit of a feel for playing with them and vice versa. And so it's sort of an experimental way of, I guess, blooding in the fringe players. It was good to see some guys like Eaton and Lungameni get a bit of a hit out, and their new, I think he's a recruit, Ruben Trumpelman, bowling quite handily in both the games. I believe he's played some South African domestic cricket. I'm not quite sure what the connection is.
Yeah, we might need to go to our Namibian sources. I might have to inbox SP, actually. Shout out to one of our mates from Namibia.
Usually knows what's going on. But yes, so they seem to have unearthed another handy bowler.
You know what, Nick? Sorry, I'm going to message him right now and see if he replies, because he's that kind of guy. He will get back to me straight away.
Yeah, and obviously Erasmus doing the bulk of the work with the batting so far. Good to see Green getting hit out as well. They've experimented a lot with the opening combination. I see they've got Davin back there as well, and Green has opened in the past. So it's, I guess, a bit of a window into where Namibia are thinking they might go in the future. In terms of the Irish side, Delaney showing again why he's touted as one of the best prospects. Played some, had a really fantastic innings in the global qualifier for the T20 World Cup.
I should probably clarify too. I think I said Namibia A as we got started. It is technically the Namibia first 11, we're led to believe, but they are close to a second 11. JJ Smith is not on the tour. A couple of other guys being rested as well, the likes of Villian and a few other players as well, which gives the chance for the likes of Nicole Lofty. Nico Davin comes back in. Picky Yafran's batted at 3 in one of the games as well. So I believe it is actually their national team, in inverted commas, but they have sort of rested a few players for the squad.
Yeah, and I guess just testing out their bench strength by the looks of things.
Yeah, as we do wait for SP's response, to pick up on what you said, Gareth Delaney is set to be that sort of breakout player for the next probably 12 to 24 months. I know that he's put in a couple of excellent performances already in the last 12 months, but that spot was relatively open for him in the Irish national team, and it seems like he's done just about everything to nail a spot. And he's the perfect guy in that situation too, because if there was one thing that Ireland did need, was that hitter in the middle order. We know the class of Balbirnie, but his strike rate probably won't be any higher than, say, 130, 140. And we know Kevin O'Brien and Sterling are going to do the job at the top of the order, but it was the middle order where we did notice for Ireland, especially in that qualifier, it was exposed a little bit. And whilst they did qualify, I think it must be said that they probably didn't play at their best, which probably just, if anything, is a testament to how good Ireland is. But to add Delaney into that, and as a bowling option as well, I think he adds another dimension to this Irish team in the shorter formats. Anyway, I'm not exactly sure how he would go in the longer format. We haven't really seen enough cricket from him to determine that. But yeah, I think he's just the perfect player that Ireland need in that middle order to really push on. And while I think about it too, and Dan Brettig actually reminded us all of this, was that Nick Larkin has actually represented Ireland and still would qualify for Ireland after that successful Big Bash he had for the Melbourne Stars. I'm not exactly sure what it would take for him to be in that Irish team, or whether or not, they see eye to eye on his selection, but he could easily do a job for them as well. So they do have a little bit more depth than they probably had maybe 12 months ago, Ireland. And I think, if we were to look, into our crystal ball with the T20 World Cup coming up, I can't see why the likes of Delaney and Larkin couldn't do a job for a team like Ireland.
Yeah, Larkin's an interesting case. He reminds me of, just as the squad was selected, they brought in Curtis Campher, who's a South African domestic player who has grown up in South Africa but has an Irish passport. And he hasn't played so far. Potentially he'll get a game by the time this podcast comes out. But it caused a bit of controversy in being selected, with a lot of comments. I guess this goes back to the passport players and expats and that whole can of worms. But there were some comments from Irish fans about how, what does this say for guys who are coming through the Irish system, and that, they're just going to parachute in someone else. And, this applies to a lot of associate cricket teams around the world with, it's a delicate balance. And we have talked about this, but bringing in talent, but also rewarding people coming through the domestic scene, it's a tricky one. In terms of Nick Larkin, I think potentially now that Ireland are full members, there would be some eligibility issues with him, his domestic contract with New South Wales and the Stars. And just, I guess this is something that we also mentioned in our discussion about the Big Bash and Ireland losing the, in inverted commas, privilege of an associate team in that you can't just swap between them. So yeah, that I think is the main obstacle for Larkin, or I don't know if there's anything off the field as well, but that's sort of the main administrative obstacle I can see. Going back to this Ireland Wolves team, I was really happy to see Rock getting a game. They've gone to Lorcan Tucker in the past as sort of the next generation of keeping, and I honestly haven't been very impressed with his technique. So it's good to see them experimenting with someone else, and hopefully, Lorcan Tucker's good enough to play as a batsman, so potentially if he could just focus on that, and having a specialist keeper, which is something that teams have played around with a bit in the past in 2020 cricket, but I think it's something that deserves a bit more of an extended run. We saw Australia a few years back play with Neville as their specialist keeper, batting down at I think number 8 or 9, and even thinking back to some county cricket a few years ago, that Michael Bates had a run in some 2020 cricket, and he was a spectacular keeper. And the logic was that having a good keeper will save you runs in terms of extras and being able to take those sharp chances that another keeper might not. And I think that has a lot of merit to it. So looking at the way Ireland play, I think having a bad keeper is not really ideal. So yeah, I'd be happy to see that. Go ahead.
What I will finally add is that A Tours and Island Wolves and Namibia experimenting with their team, I think tours like this are invaluable, because the problem that we do see for a lot of international teams at that level is the depth. They quite often have 11 players who can play extremely well, but when one goes down and a player comes in, the difference is, there's a stark contrast a lot of the time between a player coming in and a player who's had to miss out either through injury or another situation. So, what you just need to do is to be able to try and simulate high pressure match situations like on these A tours. And yeah, okay, that they're not playing for sheep stations. They're not playing for the be all and end all. They're not playing for a World Cup. Sorry, I'm using an Australianism here, but yeah, it's just if you can simulate that action and blood people for international cricket, it can only be a good thing. And once they do make that jump in official international cricket, then the golfing class and the adjustment for them is not as heavy. It's just the same as when guys come through the grades and then say into Shield cricket. And the reason why a lot of New South Wales cricketers do well when they come from grade cricket is that first grade cricket in Sydney is often regarded as the highest level of amateur cricket you can find anywhere around the world. So it's just about that preparation. Train hard, play easy is a mantra that a lot of people use, and I think A Tours are probably a good example of that. Well, we just talked about depth in the Irish setup. To move to an associate member in Nepal, and this was broken to us at least by Rajan Shah, better known on Twitter as Momo Cricket. Well, they've just rolled out central contracts for 24 men's cricketers and 18 women's cricketers. For the 24 men, it's been put into 4 tiers, A plus A, B and C, while for the 18 women, it's in 3 tiers of A, B and C. So with Cairn reinstated and now a little bit more stability in Nepal, they've been able to do that. So congratulations to them. There hasn't been any news of a new men's coach just yet. Jagat Tamata will take on a caretaker role as they do look for a new coach. There's a couple of rumours going around and I will mention them afterwards. But there's also some more news coming out of Nepal in regards to multi-day cricket, and the Kathmandu Cricket League has been renamed as the Himalaya Cricket League, and it will be played in 2-day format matches starting from the 17th of February, so that's early this week as we do record the show. It includes the top 6 academies from Kathmandu Valley participating in the event, and it's been sponsored as well. It'll be interesting to see how this goes. 2-day matches, which can only be a good thing for Nepal. It's something they've been lacking a little bit. To go back to that rumour I sort of teased before, talking to a couple of people who were present for the World Cup League 2 in Nepal last week, and you could probably make out who we are talking about. Well, they thought they spotted one Australian, Andy Bickle, as a VIP guest for that leg of the tournament. It was either Andy Bickle or Andy Bickle's doppelganger. That's yet to be confirmed, but we talk of a new coach being shrouded in mystery. I'm sure that's a name that we'll probably hear more about over the coming weeks. There's been rumours of Dougie Brown after his sacking at UAE. I don't know how strong those links are, but Nick, again, the Cricket Association of Nepal moving forward a little bit further again. We've seen their reinstatement late last year, a rollout of central contracts, now a 2-day, at least a multi-day format tournament for some Nepali players. But at this stage, it's still, for development's sake and for cricket's sake domestically, it seems to be these franchise tournaments and pop-up tournaments around the country that are carrying the development of these senior players in Nepal, and not the board taking the onus and launching domestically run state competitions or province competitions.
Yeah, it's interesting, this situation where there's kind of the board is giving out contracts, but the contracts are going to people who are not playing in board organised cricket. The fact that they do have contracts is certainly a good step forward, and indicative of, as you said, a bit more stability, and hopefully that allows them to train full time or at least train more, and really develop those skills and the discipline. Again, we talked about this before, but Nepal's team has a lot of talent, but they just haven't quite had the discipline to execute consistently. And so just if they are contracted, I think that will certainly help. It's interesting that they've got 18 women contracted as well, so I think that's a positive step, and it shows that they're taking the women's game seriously. And we saw a couple of months ago the women's domestic franchise competition, which was a good start as well. So, Nepal came second to Thailand in the Asian qualifiers, and so they're not too far off the pace. And yeah, it's another good opportunity for them to try and move up those rankings, because as we've seen, the capacity to move ahead in women's cricket, it's still a wide open field. Regarding the coaching news, the Andy Bickle rumours are interesting because Bickle has dipped his toe into associate cricket in the past. He's done some work with PNG, so it wouldn't be a complete surprise. In terms of who you would want to be coaching Nepal, I think Prabuddha Dasanayak is available. He certainly had a lot of success with Nepal a few years back, and he's slated to be coaching one of the EPL sides later in the year, so potentially that's him looking to get back into Nepali things. And also, as we heard last week, Dougie Brown is newly available and a very successful coach. So depending on who they go with, I think CAN has mentioned that they want someone with full member experience, which I'm not necessarily convinced is the be-all and end-all of cricketing experience. But if that's the path they want to go down, I think Bickle would be a decent pick.
Yeah, the Nepali role is a bit of a halfway house, isn't it? And yeah, they've made it quite clear in Nepal that they want someone with full member experience. And I think it's fair to question that importance, because for someone like Pabudu Nasanayake, he has this sense of both coming from a full member but also having the experience of working with associate countries. And I think at this level you do need that experience, because you're, as I said, to start the point, it is a bit of a halfway house sort of role. You're technically coaching in some facets, but then you're providing your mantras and providing this idea of how to manage a game from a leadership point of view as well. And I think Tim made that point well a couple of weeks ago on the pod, where, okay, yes, for many of these players, they at the high end of associate cricket, they should have a pretty fair understanding of their own game and their own techniques. But Tim made a very good point. In some associate places, you do have to start a little bit further back and to take it back technically and to iron out a few things as well. So I think Dasanayake would be a great option. He's been there before. He's won there before. He's got a proven track record there. He unearthed Sandeep Lamichhane. That should be on his resume front and centre. Someone like Dougie Brown, I think, would do an excellent job as well. I think Cairn need to be careful what they wish for, because, someone coming in with full member experience, yeah, it's great on the resume to say that you have experience coaching in Australia or India or England. But for the Australian guys who have worked with PNG, and there's been several, we've seen Andy Bickle, as you said, we've seen Joe Dawes there now, we've seen Jason Gillespie there. We've also actually seen New Zealand's Ross Taylor work in a coaching capacity there as well. It's because they understand when they go into PNG what the idea of PNG cricket and their level of development is about. And, they can actually liaise and bring PNG cricket from a position of where they need development, almost grassroots development, but some key technical facets of their game improved. Whereas I think Nepal are looking for some super coach like a football manager who can work wonders in 2 weeks. And cricket isn't quite the same thing, where, there's more responsibility laid on the shoulders of a captain, for example, and how his team wants to push on in the game and how he uses his bowlers. And to be fair to Gyanendra Malla and Paris Khadka, his predecessor, and I'm sure Khadka had plenty to say for Malla in imparting his knowledge as well. Paris Khadka is still probably one of, if not the most important members of that team when it comes to on-field marshalling the troops, because he knows what it's like, and he takes the responsibility on his shoulders with the bat. And Malla has struggled a little bit with the bat as well. So I think Dougie and I think Pabudu Dasanayake should be the top two in their priorities list. But we know what Nepal's like, and their attraction to full member talent. It'll be interesting to see where they go with this. And yeah, Jagat Tamata taking the role on a caretaker basis, but he won't be the permanent measure there. So yeah, we'll be very interested to see how that all turns out. Before we move on as well, we talk about a couple of other things to round out the show, and talking about coaching shuffles. Steve Tikolo, who was working for the Ugandan national team, previously a batting coach for his native Kenya, he's actually been appointed as the head coach of Tanzania, so we look forward to their development there. Tikolo, referred to as probably the greatest Kenyan batsman of all time, perhaps even cricketer of all time, and he knows African cricket back to front, so he's a good appointment there. I'm sure he'll bring a lot of experience to that role. That's a role I can definitely personally get behind. But to move on to a few more shuffles in backrooms and staff, Tim Cutler broke this story a few days ago that Richard Doan has been appointed by USA Cricket as their cricket operations manager. He worked most recently as the high-performance manager, working with the likes of Afghanistan and Ireland as well through their journey through the ranks into full membership. So he brings a ton of credentials, Nick. And for USA, a team and a country in terms of cricket that don't really seem to like the plain sailing, there always seems to be a lot of shuffles around that board and around the staff members there too. We could say that Richard Doan might give them a little bit more stability in terms of their development off the field as well as on.
Well, I think that depends on whether they listen to what he tells them. I know he spent a lot of time at the ICC putting forward a lot of very good ideas that then had to be filtered through the interests of various special groups in the boardroom. And we've also seen with USA Cricket with the so-called partnership with ACE and their desire to interfere, I would say, with the operations of the cricket board. It's a pretty complicated situation, and potentially he's going to have a lot of the same troubles of implementing his ideas. But if I was running a cricket board, Richard Doan would definitely be on my list of candidates to appoint, because he knows what he's doing. And the thing about Richard Doan is that he's passionate and that he actually wants these teams to succeed. And, he's, I guess what you would call a true believer. He genuinely wants associate cricket to grow and for the game to grow. And that in itself is a really important quality, I think, when you're appointing people. And, you talked about the reputational thing of full members and, how that goes in Nepal. And that's one thing. But having a guy who actually genuinely just really, really wants cricket to develop is at least as important as having played Test cricket, probably more. But we see a lot of appointments that are just, this guy used to play for India or whoever, and he must be good because they've played cricket. But the thing is, administration is not the same skill as actually playing. And, just because you're good at hitting a cricket ball doesn't mean you're actually good at thinking about things in a more technical or administrative standpoint. So actually having a specialist in this field like Dhoni is fantastic. And it's a good appointment, but I think, he's got his work cut out for him, put it that way.
Well, I've got some breaking news before we do move on towards the end of the show. SP got back to me, Nick.
Oh.
And he says that he doesn't know too much about Trumpelman as well. He does know, though, that Trumpelman's dad was born in Namibia and therefore he would qualify. It's all about sort of organising a passport. But because this tour was in South Africa, it was a good opportunity for him to sort of trial with the Namibian team. That's from SP Van Vyk, one of our friends of the Emerging Cricket podcast and the Emerging Cricket movement. So a huge thank you to you, SP. You've got a mention on the podcast. But yeah, that's great. That's good to know. And Namibia leaving no stone unturned with their preparation. I don't think they need to make too many changes. Just as a final thought before we do move on, I think they've got the bones of a very good international team there, and I think they will definitely provide a few upsets and a few news stories when we do get to the T20 Men's World Cup. Of course, the T20 Women's World Cup going on, well, now as you listen to the show. So all our focus will be drawn to that for now. A couple more things before I do let you go, Nick, as we do move late into the night here. An independent assessment has found the action of Nisarg Patel of the USA to be deemed illegal, and he has been suspended from bowling from international cricket with immediate effect. It was something we wanted to bring up, and Nick, you raised a good point this week while we were talking about the pod. It seems like the rules surrounding illegal actions in emerging cricket, or at least in associate member cricket, is a little bit murkier. Because the idea of someone rectifying their action, it seems a little bit more difficult for them to get back into the swing of things. We know that Salador is still out for Singapore, which left a huge hole in the Singapore team in that T20 World Cup qualifier. Afridi for Uganda as well is still out. It just seems to be a very difficult thing to come back from in the associate game.
There's a couple of points. The first one is that in terms of associate cricket and the granularity, when full member teams, have chucking issues, it's usually for a certain delivery, like a bowler's slower ball or a bowler's doozer or whatever is deemed to be suspicious. Whereas in associate cricket, typically it's just the bowler is just as a whole not allowed to bowl, which that in itself is somewhat unfair, but, a function of the fact that they probably don't have the same level of forensic replays available, to determine which particular delivery is suspicious. But the other point, of course, is coming back from being banned. A full member board has the cash to actually send a bowler around the world to testing centres and remodelling their actions and all that sort of thing. Whereas presumably Singapore and Uganda probably don't have that kind of money to just send guys on put them on a plane to Perth or wherever the testing centre is. And I think that's a big problem that the ICC needs to look at in terms of it's the same rule ostensibly that you have to have your action remodelled, but in terms of the practice, the way it's actually applied, it's grossly unfair to associates because they just can't afford to do that. So potentially the ICC could look at subsidising that for boards that can't afford it, because otherwise you look at associate teams and a lot of the time they don't quite have the depth that full members do, and so if you lose one of your frontline bowlers, that's going to be more of an issue than if one of Australia's bowlers is called for chucking because they've got a production line of good bowlers coming through the shield, whereas in Uganda or Singapore they don't have that same depth. So losing a guy is going to be a lot more of an issue.
Thanks for joining me for the Emerging Cricket Podcast this week. Once again, Nicholas, and hopefully next week with our full complement and with Cutler back in the side, we can go through some of that proposed 2023 to 2031 scheduling, because I think that's right in Tim Cutler's wheelhouse that I think he'd be quite angry if he missed out on that chat.
Yeah, we might be recording from Canberra next week, I think.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, next Wednesday is Canberra. Yeah, we'll both be there, going on a road trip that morning. I believe you're staying down there for the night and probably for the next game as well.
Yeah, got some family in Canberra that I can stay with, which is convenient.
Oh, must be nice. Yeah, I'll definitely be attending the first game, and depending on the work situation for me, I'll hopefully try and get out to the second game as well, but I'm not putting too much pressure on that. But yeah, it'll be a road trip. We'll probably leave around the same time. I'll meet you at Sutton's Forest on the way down there. Maybe I've got to give you an Emerging Cricket shirt as well.
Been thinking for the last couple of weeks, how am I going to get this shirt before we get to the game?
And then you realise I live on the way for you.
Yeah.
It just depends which house I'm going to be at, because I'm in the process of moving as well, so that'll be interesting. But looking forward to that road trip, and we'll run into Nishad and the Thai team, and we'll be following that rather closely. So if you are at Manuka Oval or you are in the surrounds of Canberra, make sure to get around the Thai team there. Of course, they're playing in Perth first as well. They're also playing one of their group games at the Sydney Showground as well. So if you're in Sydney or wherever Thailand are playing for this World Cup, do make sure to get out and give them your support. I know that it's very, very difficult being in a new country and playing against some of the world's best, but if we do get as many fans out there for them as we can, it might make things a little bit easier. Some news to wrap up this week's show. Scotland's George Munsey has been signed by the Pokhara Rhinos for the 2020 Everest Premier League. Munsey is likely to open the batting with Chris Gale for the franchise. Pokhara also announced the signing of West Indian quick Kesrick Williams earlier in the week. And in more T20 news, Namibia have launched their 4-team franchise league this week. In the draft, 4 senior Namibia internationals and 4 Namibia under-19 players were selected for each franchise, with the tournament beginning on March 14. To keep up with news from Cricket's New World, make sure to follow Emerging Cricket on your favourite social media platform, and make sure to give us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening to the podcast. For now, on behalf of Nick Skinner and myself, Daniel Beswick, as well as the absent Tim Cutler, enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are around the cricketing world.